Hi, I'm Faith Humphrey Hill, the maker in residence here at the Maker Lab at Harold Washington Library. Here we have two electronic knitting machines that are available for the public to use here in the Maker Lab. So when you first get the machine, it will be all wrapped up in its case. So the first thing to do is to take off its lid. When you open the case, you're going to find the cord that connects the machine to the computer and the power cord, the lace carriage, which you won't need to use very often. And these are needle bed extenders, which you also won't need too often. It'll extend the work surface of the needle bed. To set up the machine to use, the first thing you'll set up is the yarn tension mast. To set it up, you're going to fold out this triangle and lift up the tension unit until the two arrows meet. This is a piece of wax that helps glide the yarn through the unit. If it's fallen off, you can just place it right back there on the yarn tension unit. The yarn tension unit is installed right here in this little hole on the knitting machine, and you do it so that the triangle portion is facing the back. This is called the needle bed, and each needle on this bed is the equivalent of one stitch on your knitting needles. This is the carriage, and it's going to create the knitting by moving across the needle bed. To set up the carriage, when you get to the machine, the handle will be folded down. So go ahead and just pop it up, and then you'll loosen these nuts and then slide within here what's called the sinker plate. This is a storage compartment, and you're going to find several little pieces in here that you're going to need, including these two brackets, which will attach a knitting machine to the table. You'll take the clamps and slide them into these little clips underneath the machine, and then tighten them to secure it to the table. The machine is now set up, so now we just need to pull out some of our smaller tools that we'll use with our project. First, you'll find a little latch hook tool. It looks just like the needles on the bed. It'll help for different kind of yarn stitch manipulations that we'll do throughout the project. This is a needle pusher. It can move all of your needles or every other needle. We also have a variety of transfer tools. You'll also need these claw weights, which will be attached to the knitting as it grows on the bed and provide some good tension. And the last thing in the machine that you're going to be using for your project are these cast-on combs. So you'll attach these to the knitting as it grows down the machine, and then you'll attach those claw weights to it. And all of those devices will help create that tension and keep your knitting nice and straight and keep the yarn from getting tangled up inside of the carriage as it moves across the bed. They can be combined or used separately to fit the width of your item. When you're shopping for yarn, you're going to see tags like this on the ball of yarn. It's going to tell you how many yards are in there and how many grams. And then it's going to have this little icon often that'll have a little number inside of a little skein of yarn. These machines are happiest working with yarns that are between 1 and around 3. So on the thinner side of yarn. If you were to take the yarn and wrap it around 1 inch on the ruler, these machines are happiest with yarn that can wrap around about 12 to 11 times. If it wraps around fewer times than that, over 1 inch on a ruler, then it's really pretty thick for this machine, and it's really not ideal. You really want to have the thinner yarn that you could wrap around that inch at least 11 times. So now we're going to thread the machine with our yarn. For any project you're going to do on the knitting machine, you're going to need to know this step. So this one's important and relevant to really any project you're going to do on the machine. So you want to place your yarn behind the machine and make sure that it's pulling nicely and easily from the ball. Then you're going to take the end and slide it into the triangle unit. These metal pieces sort of pull apart, and that's where you want to guide the yarn. And then you're going to want to put it between this little divot that's behind this wax piece. And then around the wax, and then on the other side of that little metal plate right there. Then it feeds through this little spiral, and then you're going to pull down the mast and loop it on the end here. And this is a little break for your yarn where you can kind of keep it securely in place while you do other tasks on the machine. There's lots of different types of cast-ons with machine knitting, just like there is for hand knitting. But we're going to do the E-Wrap cast-on for these projects. It creates a nice clean edge, and it's a pretty simple cast-on to learn. To start, you're going to make just a simple little knot on your yarn and then attach it to the last needle on the bed. Now that I've got that knot on the first needle, now I'm going to take the yarn and create an eave wrap on every needle down the bed that I've pulled up to the front. And to do that, you're going to take the yarn up to the right side of the needle and then down around to the left side. And then you're going to bring it to the next needle to the right, from underneath, up on the right side, down to the left side. Then from there, pull it over to the next needle to the right of that one, and etc. all the way down. So you're kind of making a bunch of little cursive E's all the way down the machine, just like this. And I'm pulling each of these stitches nice and tight, so they're right up against what's called the pegs, that are the little metal pieces that kind of pop up across the front of the needle bed. And you're just going to keep working this way, going up through the right side of each hook and then down to the left side, and then you're going to keep moving rightward down the needle bed. So for our first row, we're going to move the carriage from the one side of the needle bed to the other. Now we'll take our cast on comb and attach it to the stitches we just made to help add a little tension and keep them from getting tangled up in the carriage as we work on our project. I don't really need this extra little piece because this one section is long enough for the work, so I'm going to go ahead and put that piece away. All right, it's nice and stable, just hanging off of the yarn. So now I'm going to take the claw weights and attach them on the ends of the cast on comb so it can help add even more weight to the piece. And we'll make sure this little latch is pushed down so it'll hit this little lever that will trigger the row counter and help us keep track of where we are in our project. You don't need to push the carriage towards the back of the machine. You don't need to pull it towards you. You don't need to lift it. You just give it some good push from either side in the direction that you're moving it. That's all you need to do. So about every inch or so, you'll want to move your claw weights up. It's nice to leave the last little hook of it just sort of dangling off the edge of your fabric. It'll just help provide even more tension over there and keep it from getting caught up into your carriage. And you don't want it so high up that the carriage will bump into it when it needs to pass by. So you don't have to go too high, but you just want to kind of push it up every so often just to help add that tension to that edge of your fabric. When you're pushing the carriage across the needle bed, there's no need to push it back or pull it forward or even push it across the bed and dig it in really hard. You just need to gently push it across the bed back and forth like this. If you're moving in a direction and it just stops in the middle, usually what tends to be the problem is there is a knot or something in the yarn that's keeping it from flowing smoothly to the machine. And once you get that cleared up, it'll continue moving across the bed just fine. If you ever try to go backwards with the carriage, it won't move. It always wants to move in just one direction, depending on which way you're working. So continue moving it in that original direction that you were working on. Don't try to retrace your steps. So I have finished knitting my scarf. I finished it at 547 rows because I just felt like that was a good length and the colors were looking really nice and even. So I figured that's where I wanted to stop my scarf today. So now we're going to bind off of the machine. There's, as with hand knitting, a few different ways that you can do a bind off, but I'm going to show you a very simple one that's easy to remember that will work for many different projects. So how I'm going to do this bind off is I'm going to use my single transfer tool and hook it onto the first needle on the knitting machine. And I'm going to pull the needle all the way out, and that's going to move the stitch past the latch on that needle. So now when I push that needle back into the knitting machine bed, it's going to transfer the stitch over the latch and onto my single transfer tool. So now the stitch is on my single transfer tool, and I'm going to go ahead and transfer the stitch over to the next needle on the bed. I'm going to hook it onto that second needle on the bed. I'm going to pull that needle all the way out so that those two stitches now are just past the latch. And then I'm going to take my working yarn and I'm going to pull my working yarn around the hook, and I'm going to push the needle back towards the machine. So that's going to leave me with a needle where two stitches have gone over the latch and have fallen off of that needle, and one stitch that will be secured on that needle in the end that is currently sitting on the hook. So now you can see how I work this across the bed to bind off all my stitches. It takes a little while to get used to using the transfer tool, but once you kind of get the hang of how to maneuver it, it can move really fast and it's very easy. Okay, now that I have finished binding off the work, I only have one little stitch left. I'm going to go ahead and cut the yarn and then just create a little knot for this last stitch. So now that the piece is off the machine, we just have to finish it off. We need to go ahead and weave in those ends. I like to use a tapestry needle. You can see it has a fatter eye, which is easier to get the yarn into. And you're just going to want to weave your stitches up and down the edge of your fabric. For a piece like this, you're just going to want to keep it nice and clean, really tidy, as close to the edge as possible, because it is such a nice, clean piece of fabric. And the very last thing you need to do is steam block your piece. So how that works is you use one of these steam irons that we have here in the Maker Lab. You make sure it's full of water and it's on the wool setting, and you're just going to lay out your knitting and then hold the iron above the knitting so that the steam can get into all the fibers. You're not going to want to put any kind of pressure. You definitely don't want to push the iron into the fabric, because that will mess up the texture of the yarn and it'll fry the yarn and it won't look as nice. So instead, you just want the steam to get in there, just the heat, and you're just going to want to pull your knitting in the direction you need it to. So if you want to straighten out any of the curled edges, you can do that by just kind of pulling them after they've had some steam, and then also just giving it a good tug. And that's all you'll need to do in order to finish off your garment and make it ready to wear.